Okay, some parts came in. I wanted to go over the last of the issues here with this G36 of Jake's. I put the cutoff lever in after I had dremelled it properly, and then I noticed that the cutoff lever goes up like the slightest bit. So obviously it's not going up, so it's not going to be usable. It's not going to pull this trolley up out of the way. So I'll pick this up here and switch out this cutoff lever, and you can see the extension of the JB weld, just to make sure that it hits semi sooner. Alright, in comparison, the last cutoff doesn't look like it hits the quadrant very well. The fourth quadrant, lower right fourth quadrant of the bushing. And here we can kind of see a little bit of a difference. There's also what looks like some wear on the top here. Of course, this doesn't have any. Alright, so you just put this in here, and it fits actually pretty nicely. So we're going to go ahead and move this cut off and see how high it goes up. Wow, that's much better. That's what you're supposed to have. Under testing with the cutoff lever, or actually any cutoff lever, even the previous, if I pull the trigger as far as I can because of the micro switch, it cannot lift up the trolley. And I talked to Jake about doing a modification to this. I just want to demonstrate that any cutoff lever, I had this happen in mine, G36, same model, same brand gearbox. The selector plate right here is positioned too long, and you can see where it taps. So if this was a little bit shorter, it would touch the tip of this cutoff lever and actually go up by the selector plate. So we can see here, as hard as I push it, it's actually just locking down the cutoff lever instead. So that's a simple modification there. However, the other modification is removing space. So if I pull slightly here, should be able to pull the trolley up. You can see the cutoff lever stops, which is good, but maybe let's say a barely cycle pull, you can see it doesn't. So space will be added by JB Weld on the cutoff lever, so it does pull it whenever I slightly pull the trigger. Okay, so with demonstration here, I will go ahead and pull the cutoff out of the way so we can see what the trolley's doing. Pull the trigger forward, and what the cutoff would do at this point is lift that trolley up, that little arm right there. This is just showing you where the arm is, and you can see it moves forward. So as I barely move this, this still does not engage. It needs JB Weld, we know that. But however, when I try to pull it back now, I can't physically, no matter how hard I do this. Even if I were to use the screwdriver or cycle the sector gear by hand, it's just not going to. To describe what's happening, the second trigger shear, the second part of it, is too long. So by closing the gap, it used to be a lot longer trigger pull, the further the trolley would go forward this area. So that lever, that little arm right there, would be able to go further this way and end up at a better position, so that when the cutoff arm comes up to pull it, it would pull the back end, and that would lift the trolley over the trigger sear easily. So what I'm trying to demonstrate is this should be liftable. You can see should be able to lift over that sear. You can see the triangle sear piece right here. Should be able to lift over it, however cannot. Now if I move the trolley more this way, I'm sure it will. So what modification do we do at this point? We pull out the sear, and we cut it down just a little bit so that it's easier on the pole when you get closer, that it will actually be able to bypass the sear. That way the trolley can come back. We want to disconnect by making the trolley come back. So it has to go over the top of the sear, and which we can see here, even physically I cannot do right now. You're not supposed to be able to right now. But if I were to hold the trigger, just to demonstrate, hold the trigger and try to lift it, I cannot physically, even with just the screwdriver, see? So that's why the cutoff lever cannot do it, because I cannot physically do it with the screwdriver either. It's not distance enough to the forward position, and so we have to remove some space off the sear to allow it to come back. And that's because this is a hair trigger mod. If this was not a hair trigger mod, was not a short trigger pull, then we wouldn't have this issue. So we're going to go ahead and make that modification and then test it. Here's the sear, and you can see that it's a little bit pointed at the top. We're going to slightly remove some, just a little bit at a time, and test this by hand. Now here we can see some indentation that it would hit there, but what it needs to do is, as this gets forward, be able to bypass so this can come back, and then when you pull this back, be able to grab it again. So that's how we get into this setup. We're going to barely move any away, just a tiny bit. And so as this goes forward, this is lifted more horizontal than, or excuse me, more vertical up. The back of this is trying to lift up vertical because it's hitting here. The cutoff lever is grabbing at this point when it would usually grab right here, which would help lift it horizontal and vertical. This angle like this would lift up. However, now it's more like trying to lift up. It's still trying to go at that angle, but it's not as well. It's not as easy. So making a modification to this should allow this to function properly. I want to demonstrate this in better light conditions, so this is a little bit better. After modification, we'll see, test to see if it works. So we hold the trigger, and the trigger doesn't bypass. That's what you want right now. It's not supposed to, like as if it's full auto. So I'm going to pull the cutoff lever up. I'm going to pull the trigger and see if I can bypass by hand just the trolley. Now you can see I put it in there, and the trolley does seem to get bypassed. You can see the sear move just barely after I did that. However, the trolley is still in the same location, and you're supposed to look at this and see why. Why is the trolley not able to come backwards? It hits into the sear on the left and right side, so we're going to make a modification there too, if that makes any sense to anybody out there. I will demonstrate again, lifting up. You could hear the click, but after passing, how come the trolley doesn't go backwards? And this is because the trolley is hitting other areas of the sear, and that's what we need to remove. So here we can see the modification of slowly just cutting down a little bit off the top of the sear. Makes that function correctly, but what we're having a problem with is right here. See how it's gray in those areas? That means it's being rubbed against. The trolley's touching that. So we're going to cut these into a bigger hole, basically leaving space so that the trolley can come back. Now looking at this, you can see I've cut away some of it so the trolley can, once it slips, fall back more through this area. One thing you could argue is why cut down off the metal when you can cut down off the plastic right here. That can be done, but you want to be careful that you probably don't remove too much. You could do both. However, there's really no reason to have this area right here, so doing too much here could be bad, because if this is not hanging straight, then you could have an issue. However, this has posts on it that keep it straight, so not really an issue in this point. So you could do either or, I guess whichever you prefer. Alright, now we're at the point that we want to test and see if the tender love and care has worked out here. Things we need to check. New cutoff. We know previous cutoff would hit into this, and I shaved this down so that it does not. So we're going to check that out right now. And to talk about how the trigger works. Okay, so we've got our parts right here just assembled, and I want to talk about how it works so everyone understands how the tender and love care came in here. As this tappet plate moves back and forth, I want to make sure that the trolley does not get hung up on it, or the spring here. Now we can see the spring's a little bit bent, so probably in the past somehow there was some rubbing there, not real sure. Maybe someone bent it by hand. This is a used gun, so it's hard to say. Here we don't see an issue. The way this works, the sear pushes this up, and as this is pushed up, it can sometimes, because this is at an angle, lift it. So it will lift it at a little bit of an angle upwards in the back. And you want to make sure that when this is pulled by the cutoff, it lifts it more upward in the back. So we'll make sure that there is no resistance here and here, if that makes sense to anyone out there. I say that because sometimes people don't understand, and I want you guys to understand, the people that don't know what's going on. If you have questions, ask them. So we're going to put this back in here. We already know that the cutoff cam goes up, or cutoff lever goes up high enough to hit the trolley, so we don't need to test that. We already saw that earlier. Now we're going to go ahead and close this. Actually, before I close it, I want to show final adjustments. So we have the tape there, which allows the space here to be shimmed properly. So as soon as you start to pull back, this is already going forward. I will probably shim this right here, or the safety selector on this side, so that the safety is solid. And then you can see here, cut down. So I cut that down, and the back of this trolley just slightly, so that it can bypass. And we can see the top of this is shaved down just a little bit. And this is all because of a hair trigger modification. The spacing is different. Mechanically, this needs to go off sooner. Because of that, the spacing has to be changed. So there's your tender love and care. Alright. So we put this in here, or at least try to. There we go. All right. So, testing point. Notice how far the trigger has to go and how much is touched here. It's kind of hard to demonstrate, but 50% you can see through the that red piece. I don't know if it shows that on the camera. So as I press it 50% of it is covered on the inside, meaning that that's the full pull right here. Anything less should be not a full pull, and will probably disconnect. So we turn this over. Other modifications. I cut this down like I said I was going to. Now we see the cutoff moves like it's supposed to. So we pull the trigger, push the cutoff back, and we can see it's pretty solid. So I'm going to lift this up, or at least try to from my angle. And right there you can see the trigger went further. So the question is the button being pressed? And right now I can tell you from looking at it, there's no more 50%. And this is what looks like to be starting position. See, watch, I'll let go of the trigger. See? So that's what it's supposed to look like. However, I'm going to do it the easy pull way. That's what happened. Now, look at the starting position. There is a tiny gap from that white space to the red space. So we can see that the red space is not covered 50% anymore. So there should be no more power at this point. So I let go, and if there's a spring in your trigger, it will do that. So it's ready to go again. Now, when I do this, because there still is too much space between the trolley and sear, this trolley does not come back all the way. However, mechanically, the question is, does it block the cutoff or the tappet plate? First test, let's pull the cutoff all the way back. No problem. Okay. Second test, pull this, and then the cutoff. Yeah, it sure is hard for me to do from this position. I'm going to hold the trigger and do it this way. Alright, so you can see there that happened. Can the tappet plate still move and it's not bounded by the trolley? Yes. So the trolley is not coming back all the way, but the power is still disconnected, so that's all that matters. As long as we can grab the trolley again, which we can, and you can see that right there, and we'll see it right there move. Just a second. I'm just making it easier to pull it by hand. And right there you can see disconnect. So it does work properly with tender love and care. There is part of your hair trigger. Now the last part is JV weld, which I'm going to do. So right here you can see it just comes up, no problem, that's good. However, if I slightly pull the trigger, it should pull. This should not be pullable. The reason is because it needs to get ready to grab that trolley. So if I pull it away, it can grab it now, but that's not reliable. Because if you're shooting this, you'd have to pull the trigger really fast to be able for the cutoff to grab it. So doing a JB weld and adding space on the cutoff lever will grab the trolley in time, more reliably, always getting a semi-auto. And that's what I'm going to do on the last thing here. So you got tender love and care modifications on here, and you can see that it looks a little advanced. However, just observing how this works, the system of the trolley is just supposed to move away from a power source. The power source here is just hitting this micro switch. Now if I didn't have a micro switch, it would just be the trolley's contact touching two other contacts. We call them the trigger contacts. Once it just moves away, you have a disconnect. And so there you go.